Hello, this is Peter Duveen again, and as you know, I began this series of videos by discussing the fact that different newscasters or commentators have backgrounds that they want to use to lend a kind of certain ambiance to their pronouncements, and that oftentimes some of these commentators use a library or their own personal library as the background to show that they're well educated or well versed in the subject that they're talking about, etc., or well read, whatever you want to say. So I've been taking that theme up with this series about books, particularly books or some of the books of which are in my background here, but I've sort of departed from that, and sometimes I'm showing other books as well. I just celebrated a birthday. It was my 72nd birthday, and what did I do? Well, I had a nice little celebration, and I managed to received some nice gifts, among which were two interesting volumes. One of the volumes is this book on chemistry. You can see that there. Let's look at the frontispiece here. There we go. Now, you'll probably notice the date there. It is, what is it? 1876. Okay, first book of chemistry. So this is for young people. And interestingly enough, you can barely make it out, but it is actually inscribed. And the name of the person inscribing it was Jeannette Mckelvey. Jeannette Mckelvey. And I thought this was interesting because an inscription always makes a book more interesting. And as I turned the pages carefully, I found another inscription in the back, as you can see there, and it says, James McKelvey Jr. and Jeannette, owners of this book, residence 528 Fifth Avenue, New York. Now, there's not a specific date of ownership, but of course there is the date of the book itself, 1876. And this is obviously, it says, for the use of schools and families by Worthington Hooker, MD. And it's a wonderful little book. I haven't really examined it carefully yet. But I can only say that this is one of many books where there's an inscription that indicates who the owner was, or the owners were in this case. And I did look up the Jeannette McKelvey, and there is a woman, Jeannette Mckelvey, whose dates are 1864 to 1945, and that could very well have been this woman. Certainly that would have meant she was, let's see, 1864, she was about 12 years old. If we're talking about the same person, she was 12 years old when when this book was published. So sometime, perhaps shortly thereafter, this book became hers. Now, apparently she shared this with her brother, according to the inscription in the back, of course. But if one looks very carefully, one can see that the book, the pages there are inscribed with the initials M. Let's see, what are they? I believe it's JM, and therefore I expect that this was her book. It was Jeanette's book. Now, so there's a lot to the book itself, of course, being a chemistry book. But it is interesting the kind of inscriptions you see in many books and how they tell you something about the previous owner, sometimes the very first owner of that book. I'll give you another example of this. Here we have another book that I received for my birthday, and the inscription is Donald M. Reed. Donald N. Reed, Graduate College, Princeton. Graduate college. Maybe he was in graduate school at that time. Donald N. Reed went on to become the professor of physics at Cooper Union in New York City for about 21 years. He retired from that position in 1957. He was a graduate of Princeton and graduated with high honors. And this must have been his book when he was studying physics. He also wrote a paper on cosmic rays that was well attested to. The book itself is called The Mathematical Theory of Electricity and Magnetism by James Jeans. And James Jeans was a fairly reputable physicist. His name is attached to some of the formulae discovered during the period he lived in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This book was published in 1927, and it is a 5th edition, so there were earlier editions. What I do like about an older book is that older books tend to, especially ones written around the time that he was writing, tend to go into more details and more justification for different formulae or different ways of looking at various fields of physics. Now, in this interesting book, we have, besides your regular electricity and magnetism, there's a chapter devoted to the theory of the electron, which is a theory that Heinrich Lorentz, I think that's his name, I forgot his, I don't know, I'm going to butcher, Lorentz, last name, developed. And then it actually goes into special and general relativity. And at the time this book was written, general relativity was not that well accepted. It was not fully accepted. But what is interesting is that this book does delve into it, and actually some of quantum mechanics, but nothing as recent as Schrodinger's equation or something like that, but rather I think it ends at Bohr's theory of the electron. So there's a lot of interesting reading material here, especially, like I said, general relativity. I haven't examined the entire thing. He has a section on the existence of the ether, which is sort of interesting and was a controversial subject at that time, although today most scientists have abandoned the idea of the ether as a vehicle that carries electromagnetic waves. So this is an interesting book, and as I said, the owner was Donald M. Reed, and by adding this book to my collection, I add another book here. And this is, let's see, this was also owned by Donald M. Reed. Oops. But this book I got out of the dump. Now, how did I get a book by Donald Reed in the dump and then got another book by Donald Reed, not by, but owned by Donald Reed in a reputable bookstore? Well, that's a long story, but at any rate, I have these two books that were once owned by Donald Reed. The other book is called A Treatise, what is it? A Treatise on the Analytical Dynamics of Particles and Rigid Bodies. So there you go, and that book is written by who? E.T. Whitaker. E.T. Whitaker, interesting fellow who wrote several books, one on, I don't know, the theory of relativity or some kind of historical book of science where some people allege he doesn't really give Einstein his due credit for developing relativity, although that's in dispute. In other words, apparently Whitaker's take was that Einstein did not play as much a part as he is generally thought to have in developing the theory of relativity. So that's an interesting viewpoint, and I'd be interested in finding out how Whitaker justifies that, because you know, today if you don't bow down and worship Einstein, you're really not not going to make it in academia. Well, I'm afraid I have to go now. I hope you enjoyed seeing these books. I don't know if that was of any interest to you, but I hope it was, and we'll see each other again soon. Thank you.